everybody. Thanks for tuning in. This is John Sullivan. You may also know me as Buffalo 66, and you are listening to the Bet Like No One's Watching podcast. And it's International Podcast Day, I believe, so perfect time to do a podcast. I've had a lot of time issues lately, so I'm not sure how long this one's going to be today. I got a couple things to talk about, and we'll get through it as quickly as I can. And you can follow me on Twitter at Buffalo Hold'em, and you can follow the podcast on Twitter at BLNowPod, and of course our website is blnowpod.com. So it's the 6th episode, and I'm going to do what I did last time and review my bets from the previous week. I'm going to talk a little bit about my sports betting and how I ended up for the month, and talk a little bit about being a sharp versus being a square as far as betting goes, and how I feel about that whole theory. But let's just get right back to where we left off. And this past week in football, I didn't have a great week. I went 1-3 in college, had 0-1 in CFL, and I went 2-0 in NFL. But I finished up the month overall a loser. So let's review these bets. Last Thursday, I had the Cincinnati-Memphis game under, and that was a disaster. The Cincinnati starting quarterback, got knocked out in the first quarter. I thought I had a fighting chance, and the backup came in and threw for almost 500 yards. Both teams scored almost at will, went over 100 points. I had under 70.5, so that was a lost cause. And on Saturday at noon, the early game, I got BYU +7, which was the best number. And, of course, they got crushed by Michigan 31-0. They basically quit, and the coaches were not prepared to make changes. I was very disappointed. Michigan was not... They didn't have any secret strategy. You knew what they were going to do right from the start, and BYU was not prepared to play them. I'm not sure what the issue was, but I was definitely on the wrong side of that game. And we'll talk about whether that was the public square side or the sharp side, or if it matters. The afternoon game, I had TCU -4.5, and I also got the best number there. Was one of the best games I've seen in a long time, and TCU did not cover. They won the game outright on a crazy fourth down play, but they should have covered. They should have won this game by 14. They, on at least 3 different drives, I think it's more 4 or 5, they had the Texas Tech in a punting situation, but the drives were extended by personal fouls, late hits, unsportsmanlike conduct, just mental brain farts, for lack of a better term. I'm not going to say I was unlucky there, but I feel like I was on the right side of that bet, and I got a good number. It just didn't work out for me. So that's 3 straight college losses, and then in the night, Saturday night, I had Toledo -4. Which there was, it was 7.5 all week long, and I wasn't really going to touch it. But I got down to 4, and boy, I thought I was getting good value there, and I hopped on that, and they did not disappoint. They won that game 37-7, and they never trailed, and they were up 10-0, 17-7, never looked back. Saturday night, I also had a CFL game, Toronto and Ottawa under 52.5, 53. This game went over. It was very chippy. There was a punt return for a touchdown early on, so there were 14 points scored in like the first 6 minutes. It did go over in the fourth quarter. There were a lot of penalties, very chippy game. Kept drives alive, put teams in the red zone, and that hurt the play. I expected a better defensive effort from Ottawa because the game was so important in the standings. But did not work out. I'd probably play it again, given the circumstances. But fortunately, on Sunday, I had Atlanta against Dallas. The Falcons won going away. They were down 21-7 in the beginning. It looked like it could have got ugly quick. But that Atlanta offense is really good if they stay healthy. Boy, they're really good. Atlanta has a better coaching staff than they had last year. The guy they got rid of last year was one of the worst coaches. He cost me money last year against the Lions. His game management was horrible. I'm not saying their new coaching staff is elite. I'm just saying it's better than what they had. So I think Atlanta is going to be a team to watch for value bets this year. I obviously, the second half of the season, the public's going to pick up on that. And then on Monday, I wasn't really going to touch the Packer game, but it went from 6.5-ish all the way down to 4.5 a couple hours before game time, and I was able to buy 3.5 at -120. And Green Bay is just so good at home. I think 37-3 when Rodgers starts at home, and you got to think they're worth 3 to 4 points is an easy cover for them at home. And that game was never in doubt. They won by 10, 38-28, but the cover at 3.5 was never ever in doubt. They could have put up 50. So I had a 2-0 week in NFL, and but I had a bad month and finished down overall. I had my worst CFL month ever at 0-3. That was, just happens. There were a couple of CFL plays that I liked that I didn't play because I didn't get the best number, and that would have made things a lot more even, but didn't happen. 5-9 in NCAA for the month, winning in NFL 4-3, and my overall CFL record is 14-9, and that's still very respectable. It's over 60%. And by the way, all of my records are posted on Twitter at the end of every month. So if you go to my Buffalo Hold'em Twitter page, you will see I post my monthly record on my timeline, and I post a link to a Google Sheet for each sport I keep track of. My wagers, since I started making my picks public in 2013, I have a spreadsheet for each sport, and you can check those out. And if you add up, I've had some really good runs and some really bad runs. My 2014 college, I think I picked like 20% for the season. It was really bad. But if you add up my wins and losses for all three football disciplines for the last 3 years, I'm up overall. So it's been a winning proposition for me. I'm probably fade material in college at this point, but we're all learning and trying to get better. But I've been a winner at NFL, and I've definitely been a winner at CFL. And so going back to the couple of picks from Saturday, I got some interaction on Twitter, especially about my BYU pick. And somebody mentioned, hey, the sharp money, or people I know that are sharp, are on Michigan. And I really don't look at things as being black and white, or sharp versus square, or public versus wise guy. I don't consider myself to be sharp or square. I consider myself to be a value better. I'm not either sharp or I'm not either square. I look for lines I think offer the best value, regardless of whether they're on the public side or on the wise guy side. So going back to this BYU game, I thought +7 was a good value. It was the best number I saw all week. I had BYU as a 1-point dog. I thought they would keep the game close. 1-point dog with the home field advantage added in for Michigan. And Michigan, as a popular team, has lots of public money bet on it. There's some other teams like Alabama, Penn State, USC. They're big public favorites, so a lot of public money comes in on those sides. And I was waiting for the line to shoot up on BYU, and I was hoping it would go to 7.5, and it never did. I guess that's where the books took a stand. They didn't want to make it a 2-score spread or an 8-point, 2-point conversion spread. Depending how you look at it, you could argue either side was the sharp side. You could say the public and the sharp was on Michigan, or you could say the sharp was on BYU and the public was on Michigan, because the books didn't raise the line. Regardless, I was on the wrong side. The bet was a disaster. It didn't pan out. But however, similar comparison, the Toledo game, the line dropped from -7 to -4 really quickly, and there was a lot of talk on Twitter how about a bunch of wise guy money was coming in on Arkansas State. And I had Toledo as a 10.5 point favorite, 10.5 point favorite in my model. So dropping it down to 4 gave me 6.5 points, more than I should be getting, in my opinion. So another good value, and also the best number that you could get on the game. Excuse me. Toledo rolled at home 37-7, even though it was considered the square side of the bet. So you can say I was on the sharp side, you can say I was on the square side, but in one of those bets, I was horribly wrong, and another one of those bets I cruised to a cash. So I don't consider public money as much when placing a wager. It's all about finding value, but I do think in the NFL, which is different from college, a good long-term strategy is fading the public as long as you use it with handicapping. I don't think blindly fading the public is going to get you any decent results. It's going to take some type of handicapping and then seeing where the public money lies. I look at line movement in concert with my model to find good spots to bet, and unfortunately sometimes I'm way off. So thanks for listening to the Bet Like No One's Watching podcast, and I'm going to spend the rest of my podcast today talking about daily fantasy sports, and this has been a hot button topic. And as a matter of fact, I just got off Twitter before recording this, and there's been a lot of DFS talk. There's a gaming conference going on this week, and there's been a lot of public comments made from DFS operators and potential regulators and whatnot. The DFS talk has just gotten insane lately, and it's more about the industry than about the games themselves. And I do want to dedicate a podcast to the actual game of daily fantasy sports. And right now it's dominated by salary cap, and that's really not good for the growth of the industry. And I'm going to talk about that another time, but I'm going to go back about a week or so, and Scott Van Pelt from SportsCenter from ESPN did an op-ed piece or an opinion piece on his SportsCenter show about daily fantasy sports being gambling. He said, I'm not against daily fantasy sports. I'm an adult, but it's daily fantasy sports is gambling, and to call it anything else is being disingenuous. That's a paraphrase of what it's not exactly what he said, but it's a paraphrase of what he said. And there was some backlash from the DFS people, the DFS industry people, and I don't really mean the game operators themselves. I mean more of the ancillary industry people like Roto Grinders. And Dan Beck, who runs a podcast on Roto Grinders, dedicated a podcast to what Scott Van Pelt talked about. And he seemed upset. And I've interacted with Dan many times, and we both know each other from the early days of daily fantasy. And I doubt he listens to this, but I would love for him to come on and talk with me about daily fantasy. He's a super great voice for the industry, although I think he can be disingenuous about, his podcast is sponsored by a game operator, a DFS game operator, so of course he's always going to be in that corner. But on his podcast, he said that daily fantasy sports is skill gaming, and they deserve the right to call it skill gaming because of the carve-out in the Unlawful Internet Gaming Enforcement Act. And he also said that it's peer-to-peer gaming, and it's not better versus house like a traditional sports book. Well, my answer to that is the daily fantasy industry, you can't have it both ways, guys. You're at the point now where you're going to have to face scrutiny. Daily fantasy sports is a largely unregulated industry with multi-billion-dollar valuations. It's a huge industry. And a weekly ad spend over $100 million. And you can't operate on that scale and not face public scrutiny. there are going to be people that are going to say, hey, we need to know more about this. There's going to be people that say, hey, I don't like this. There's going to be people, that are going to want to stop it. None of the big game sites any daily fantasy sites offer any rhetoric on responsible gaming, which is something that virtually all sports books, brick and mortar sports books or online offshore books do. They offer some type of responsible gaming ads, nomenclatures, disclaimers, ways to seek help if you're a problem gambler. Other than making sure that players are 18, DraftKings and FanDuel do nothing to sponsor responsible gaming. And the only reason they do the 18-year-old part is because of the credit card transactions involved. Also, betting exchanges like Betfair and Matchbook are peer-to-peer sports betting. And the house takes a cut of all the action, and that's exactly the same model that FanDuel and DraftKings operates on, and it throws Dan's argument right out the window. Now, we don't have betting exchanges available to the U.S. at the moment. I wouldn't be surprised if they come into play as soon as sports betting is expanded in the United States. But you can't argue that it's not gambling because it's peer-to-peer with the house taking a cut, or person-to-person. That's a very shallow and fallible argument. So the question I have is, why does this industry operate unfettered up to now? And the answer is really simple, and it's credit cards. You can play daily fantasy sports from your home, or you can play it from your phone with your credit card. Now, the last time I checked, you cannot walk into a sports book in Vegas or go to the parlay window in Delaware and place a sports bet with your credit card. I know some people use sports credit cards in offshore sports books if you have the right kind of credit card and the right kind of... but there are specific laws to prevent people from making sports bets with your credit card. And you can't do it in the U.S. With legal sports books. The point of all this is the credit card spend is the driver of financing the casual player in the daily fantasy sports industry. They have all of these PR firms and market research firms doing all these studies on exponential growth and potential for growth in daily fantasy. But nobody ever mentions what percentage of the handle is generated by credit cards. The big operators never talk about it. It's something they don't want to talk about because a big chunk of their handle is generated by credit cards. I'm not saying it's debt finance, but it's possible to debt finance your play, where you can't do that with a sports book. To tie this all together, regulation is inevitable. You can't have an industry this size and not have some regulation. My prediction is many states will consider these daily fantasy sites to have to be licensed. I'm not saying a traditional gambling license. They may just say, we require fantasy sports companies to operate with a fantasy sports license. It might just be a shakedown for money. But that's overhead that these companies aren't paying now. And what does that mean? It means higher rake likely, less good news for the player going down the road. There's going to be a lot of headwinds if daily fantasy sports wants to keep growing. But what irks me is that the industry got as big as it is, and the daily fantasy regulars are so appalled that people will question if it's a game of skill or whether it needs licensing. I don't think anybody's saying you can't keep playing daily fantasy sports. I think they're saying that the market needs to be regulated, just like other markets are regulated. unregulated online poker didn't work. There were a lot of scandals and ended up being shut down by the government. So I don't think Daily Fantasy wants to go down that road. They're saying, oh, it's too big for it to be shut down. Well, regulation can change things. So assuming that regulatory issues can be hurdled, how far can the industry go? Another interesting point that I noticed in the last week, there are some indications that DFS growth in the current model, I want to say, that has peaked. The Week 2 NFL contests, DraftKings had a significant overlay. I think that kind of showed a limit to how much people will play. They had their $10 million $20 entry contest. And despite spending over $100 million in advertising, despite allowing scripts with automated entry and automated editing, and despite doing backdoor promotion to kill the overlay by offering discounted entries, they didn't fill it. So they risk that overlay. When they offer the $10 million up front, they say, we're taking a risk and we know it might overlay, but that's part of our marketing plan. We want to get eyes on the site, and the regulars that see the overlay are going to join in, and the new people will see a chance to make a big payday, and they'll join in, and we'll advertise it. Well, they spent the most they've ever spent on advertising. They offered basically the biggest prize they ever offered in a Sunday contest, and I think it had about 30% overlay. I don't remember what the exact overlay was. I'm not going to say 30%, but they didn't fill it, even though they allow automated entry. That is telling. And they quickly reduced Week 3 contest down to a $7 million contest. So they reduced it by 30% going forward. And DraftKings has offered more types of daily fantasy sports, soccer, racing, NASCAR, esports. I think there's too many options for the casual user to churn his or her deposit into these other sports. And not only that, but the learning curve is steep. I don't know anything about esports. I know there's people that play it, and I also know that there's been some strong accusations of match fixing in esports. And I certainly don't want to get involved in that. And I do think that that traditional betting is the way to go with these sports. It's kind of like MMA. I'm a sports bettor, but I don't bet tennis. I don't bet MMA. I don't bet boxing. I love boxing, but the match fixing issue is something that I have to stay away from. You never know. Anyway, the learning curve on these new sports is steep, and the fish are losing more quickly to the sharks in the sports that are already solved, that I use in quotation marks. The algorithms in baseball, they're already proven to be winners, and I'm sure there's some in football and NBA that exist that are proven to be winners. And the fish that are playing these sports are going to be losing money so fast they won't have money left over to get involved into learning the other sports. Their beginner games are their only hope, and they only get 50 entries in those. So, daily fantasy it's going to be around, but it's got to evolve. As the status quo, there's got to be regulation integrated into daily fantasy, and as the status quo, instead of offering new genres of the salary cap game, it has to evolve into different types of games. And I'll dedicate a podcast to the whole game design of daily fantasy sports at some point, because I think that's a really interesting topic, and I would love to have a guest for that we could bounce ideas off of each other. But it's interesting times. It's fun to watch it all unfold, and I don't play much daily fantasy sports anymore. I think I don't want to fight the algorithms, and until they bring new styles of games into the fold that eliminate the automated edge, they won't get my money. I'm sticking to sports betting, and I hope you stick to it too. I want to thank you for listening. Once again, my name is John Sullivan. You can check me out at Buffalo Hold'em on Twitter. And this is the Bet Like No One's Watching podcast. So please hit me up with comments or questions or ideas. And until next time, Bet Like No One's Watching. Take care. We'll see you soon.